What does NATO do when a stealth submarine can't dive? It waits. The Russian Novorossiysk, a Project 636.3 Kilo class, surfaces through the Channel and North Sea with a life-threatening fuel leak and navigation collapse, already beaten before Sweden even shows up. In the next minutes, you'll see how Swedish Gripens, Visby Corvettes and Saab 340 patrols built a three-layer trap, not to sink it, but to strip it. Diesel signatures, ballast noises, comms glitches, magnetic anomalies, the sub's combat identity, stolen in daylight. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why did one of Russia's quietest subs choose the noisiest route through NATO's front yard? Because the Novorossiysk stopped being a submarine in the way that matters. Leaving the eastern Mediterranean after a signals tasking, it set a northerly track that should have been discreet, past Sicily, up through the Tyrrhenian or Ionian window, rounding Gibraltar, and then a clean run toward the Channel before bending into the North Sea and on to St. Petersburg. Instead, it became a headline. Escorts fell in, a tug idled nearby, and the hull stayed on top, not because it wanted attention, but because diving turned into a wager with fire. A healthy Kilo works like this. On batteries, it's near silent, its motors humming at levels that blend into ocean noise. Periodically, it raises a snorkel to run diesel generators, recharge, and refresh air, then slips back down to slow, quiet transit. That cycle creates the AIP-like effect without true air-independent propulsion. The strength is discretion. Break that cycle, and the boat drags a noise tail. Constant surface running means diesel thrum, ventilation roar, and a visible wake that even a hobbyist can time from a pier. Every minute up top writes its position to anyone paying attention. The failure chain started in the Middle East. Navigation confidence cratered. Software governing control and sensors needed repeated reboots, the kind that freeze situational awareness and confuse backups. Fuel contamination crept into the lifeblood of the plant, seeding fumes that pooled in compartments. Diesel vapor changes the rules. It lowers ignition thresholds, turns switches and static discharges into risks, and demands strict ventilation profiles that limit speed and maneuvering. Emergency checklists kick in, slow turns, minimal throttle changes, steady headings, all to avoid sloshing fuel into hotspots or pushing vapors toward sparks. The crew knows the math. A wrong input could mean a flash fire with no exit. Diving with that mix is worse. Pressure at depth forces liquid through weak seals, magnifies leaks, and traps vapor where it can't vent. Compromised bilge and ventilation systems lose the fight against fumes. If power blinks during a software hiccup, the boat risks going dark underwater without reliable navigation redundancy. That is how a submarine becomes a sealed hazard, not a combatant, so the captain stays shallow, then stays surfaced, running the safest bad option in daylight. Logistics closed in as well. Since 2022, Turkey's enforcement of the Montreux Convention locked routine warship passages. Rotations compressed, boats stretched deployments, skipped ideal yard periods, and lived with deferred fixes until a return leg. That policy turned the eastern Mediterranean into a dead end for Russian submarines with problems. If something breaks, the only road home runs past a dozen sets of eyes. By the time the Novorossiysk pointed at the Strait of Gibraltar, the outcome was set. The Channel and North Sea are not empty water. They are crisscrossed by shipping lanes, watched by coast guards, navies, and commercial radar. An AIS silent escort stands out. A Russian tug shadowing a surfaced sub invites attention. Ship spotters log hulls from breakwaters. NATO ISR fills the gaps, matching tracks, tagging speeds, and building a movement pattern that looks less like a patrol and more like a patient transfer. Claims that NATO hunted it into the open miss the obvious. The boat was already exposed. Fuel vapor on board meant no safe dive. Bilge issues and power reliability questions killed underwater options. Emergency procedures cut agility. That combination telegraphed its route days ahead. All anyone had to do was wait at the bends: Gibraltar, the Channel, the Skagerrak, the Narrows into the Baltic. The Novorossiysk arrived on schedule because it had no other schedule, which brings us to the pivot. With the hull unavoidable and the timeline fixed, the race shifted from finding it to exploiting it. The only unknown was who would press in first and what exactly they would take. The goal wasn't to sink a stranded hull, it was to take what it could never get back: how it talks, how it moves, how it hides. With the route set by its own problems, Sweden built a catchment zone and waited on the Baltic's edge. Air overhead, low signature teeth on the surface, a quiet brain tying it all together. The target would drift into it like a car rolling into a checkpoint it never saw. Gripen E flights lifted from Ronneby and fanned out along the predicted path. They didn't need a dogfight. They needed to listen and apply pressure. Afterburners flashed to mark the boundary. Missiles hung visible under the wings to make the rules clear. The Erexus electronic warfare suite soaked up emissions from the sub and its tug, mapping every stray frequency into a clean ledger. AESA search modes painted the surface picture without lingering. The Skyward infrared system tracked heat pools and exhaust plumes when radios went quiet. Each pass salted away more of the boat's electronic fingerprint, while strict rules of engagement kept the encounter controlled and boring for anyone hoping for a splash. Down at wave height, 2 Visby-class Corvettes eased into the lane the tug had to take. Composite hulls kept their radar outlines small, their wake stayed modest in the chop. One vessel took the port quarter, the other mirrored starboard, trimming distance until the 57mm guns sat comfortably in range of the sub's bridge fittings. They didn't have to fire, the sight line did the talking. Torpedo 47 tubes stood ready, and their crews set a posture that meant any sudden dive attempt would be answered in seconds. Close in, their sonars ran shallow water settings built for cluttered Baltic acoustics, pinging and listening in tight bursts while deck cameras rolled continuous video for later frame-by-frame study. High above, the Saab 340S orbited like quiet routers. Their ESM racks vacuumed up every call, retry and chirp, comms checks, tug-to-escort coordination, and the erratic bleeps that ride along with malfunctioning systems. Magnetic anomaly sweeps trace the sub's steel shape against the Earth's field, giving a baseline signature that doesn't care about weather or camouflage paint. The aircraft stitched the air and sea layers into one timeline, feeding tracks bearing rates and equipment states back to a fused plot. If the captain tried a sprint, the plot would harden. If he slowed, the net would tighten. This is where the live autopsy starts. The Corvette's hydrophones recorded diesel generator harmonics when the load shifted, catching the telltale wobble of a strained alternator and the uneven throb that dirty fuel forces into a cylinder bank. Ballast valves clacked in patterns the engineers know by muscle memory, and those rhythms went onto tape. Ventilation fans cycled in stiff, conservative intervals, the tempo of a crew treating fumes like a fuse, and every cycle had a pitch and amplitude that becomes a reference line. Even the tug's prop and tow line chatter mattered because it told analysts how the Russian side manages a crippled transit. Over several hours, the profile filled in cavitation onset speeds, gear mesh tones, pump start delays, and micro-oscillations in RPM under cross-sea swell. That becomes a library entry, a match key for the next patrol that thinks it's invisible. Around the edges, the NATO net watched the exits. UK and Danish units tagged the western approaches. Norway watched the northern seams. With Finland now inside the alliance, routes to shelter keep shrinking and timing windows get shorter. The Baltic, never wide to begin with, turned into a funnel with fewer blind corners and more ears per mile. When the tug and sub crossed the checkpoint, the box closed without a scrape. Sweden walked the formation east, harvested the data, and let the convoy keep moving. The lesson hung in the wake. When a kilo leaves port next time, its sound will already have a name. The win wasn't the standoff in the Baltic, it was the digital heist. Sweden and its partners walked away with the Novorossiysk's acoustic and electronic profile, diesel rhythms, valve timings, comms quirks, an identity card that makes future kilos louder on every sensor and slower on every escape. That theft turns a myth of silence into a solvable problem.